What's up, guys? Josh here, and today we're going to be talking about patterns. First, what are the archetypal patterns that we're talking about? They're patterns in reality that shape reality, much like Jung's archetypes shape reality with great influence on human behavior. Also, like the pre-modern idea that the desires, behaviors, and even events in life and nature are heavily influenced by what the ancients called the spirits, the gods and goddesses, or by God, or by demons, spirits, genie, jinn, angels, watchers, saints, so on and so forth. While most modern people don't describe these archetypal patterns in that kind of language, the fact that these patterns still exist and persist, shaping reality in the way that they always have, remains. I want to give you a couple of quick examples. I'm a beekeeper. I keep bees with my father. Like with most things in life, to keep our colonies healthy, we need to balance order and chaos. Right. So the first pattern that we'll go over is the opposites. So with bees, if I place them in an environment that gets too cold, or maybe it doesn't get enough sun, or it gets too much wind, those extremes cause an imbalance and I'll lose my colony. They'll either die or they'll go find a different place to live. I also like to fly fish. So another example could be the flies that I tie. So I'll tie a fly to represent, let's say, a minnow in the water. It's called a streamer. And I'll use feathers and I'll use thread and glue and all sorts of things to represent this pattern, which is basically a symbol of a fish in the water, a little fish that bass like to eat and trout like to eat. But if it's out of balance, that is, let's say on one side I just go crazy with the feathers. Like it's just a fluffy mess. Looks like a little bunny rabbit on half of the fly. But on the other side, I go crazy on the order side of things, right? To bring order to the fly, you trim the excess, you trim the feathers. And if I trim that down to nothing on the other side, you have pure chaos on one side and pure order on the other side. It's not going to cast right, and it's not going to present right in the water. And when the fish see that fake minnow in the water, they're going to say, I don't want that in my belly, and they're going to swim away. I won't catch anything. So balancing order and chaos is incredibly important in our lives. And those are just a couple examples, but obviously across the board in our relationships, in our work, our businesses, everything that we do requires that balance of the opposites, the joining of heaven and earth. This is what Carl Jung called conjunctio oppositorum, the union of opposites. So that's just a couple quick examples for you. Let's bring it up a little bit higher. Let's talk about the heavenly things. So in this metaphysical, invisible world above us, we have virtues. We have vices in this invisible world as well. And one of those virtues is called love, right? We don't have a very good English translation for it, but there's this idea in the Bible of perfect love, heavenly love, divine love, which is called agape. And this agapic love, it is said, has basically infinite endurance, infinite faith, always protects, never fails. It's invincible. Literally invincible, right? I don't like the translation very well. The verse, it's 1 Corinthians 13:7 says, it bears all things, speaking of love, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. But really, believes all things is, they're using the word pistis, which is faith, and all things is the whole or every kind of. So that could be translated that basically love has whole faith, complete faith. But anyways, it never fails. And so I guess you could say the most important pattern to understand are these patterns of perfect love. And if you're able to recognize that pattern above you, and if you're able to kind of reach out and grab it, embody it, in the same way that embodying the Logos works, right? This is a version of embodying the Logos, as the Logos is the Christ and the Christ is God and God is love. But if you're able to do that, the benefits are outrageous. There's so many benefits for embodying this perfect love. If you're able to do it, you'll literally be invincible, and you can literally never fail if you're actually embodying perfect love. But that's the tricky thing. How do you do that? It's a loaded topic. But let's say you're a young man. You're looking for the perfect spouse. You're trying to be attractive to the perfect spouse. You're trying to be the best person for that person that you think is going to be perfect for you. So you're going to the gym, you're hitting the gym, you're trying to become a better communicator, you're trying to be competent in your work, you're trying to become a good protector and provider ultimately for the long term for your future family and spouse. And the best way to do that is by understanding what this care is, right? This perfect love, and embodying it. If you're able to do that successfully, the ideal spouse, let's say, the women in your life will be attracted to you, because women are attracted to competence. They're attracted to men who have the ability to protect and the ability to provide. And that's precisely what this perfect love, this agapic love, gives you the ability to do. It's embodying perfect love is embodying perfect competence, infinite endurance, infinite whole, perfect faith, right? And confident expectation, the ability to always protect as perfect love always protects. And invincibility, essentially, of some sort, right? It never fails. So that's a really good example, I think, of being able to recognize these higher patterns, and not just recognize them, but embody them to the best of your ability. Okay, so we have that example of the opposites. There are many opposites in reality, of course. We have the yin yang symbol is a really good symbol representing order and chaos, and the balance of the two. Heraclitus says, within that context of the logos and of the opposites, he says, war is the father of all things, meaning the war of the opposites. There's always this tension of love raging against hate, hot against cold, male against female. But there's also the union. And when you're able to unify the opposites, that's when you create this heavenly space, this sacred space, so to speak. And that can happen at the very lowest level all the way up to the very highest level, which you could call the heavenly level or the cosmic level, whatever you want to call it. But really, joining heaven and earth, that's kind of the ultimate joining of opposites. And so there's this other pattern that's represented in the scripture that says, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Right, on earth as it is in heaven. Again, this is the idea: is your what is above in this perfect pattern, something like the perfect love, perfect care, can be done on earth, and it's actually more of an influence of the higher things on the lower things. What happens in whatever this metaphysical world is happens in the world below, in the physical, in the material. This is where the hermetic text, as above, so below, comes from, right? They say, as in heaven, so on earth. What happens in a higher realm or plane of existence also happens in this lower realm of earth. Psychologically, that just means that the patterns above and outside, beyond the individual psyche, for example, directly affect the patterns below, within the unconscious mind, for example. So this is why St. Paul says that this earth is merely a copy and shadow of the heavenly. He also says in 1 Corinthians 13:12 that we can only see these higher things imperfectly, like a puzzling reflection in the mirror. Also, the verse, Matthew 16:19 says, "Whatever you bind, that is forbid, declare to be improper and unlawful on earth, will have already been bound in heaven. And whatever you loose, that is permit or declare lawful, on earth will have already been loosed in heaven," speaking to the disciples. So The idea there is that heaven has a direct influence on earth. And we've talked a little bit in the past about what heaven means, what the category of heaven is, and what the category of earth is. It's something similar to order and chaos. It's something similar to space and time. But you can look at my other videos on that. Watch those, they're good. But yeah, the idea here is simple. The invisible world is filled with these invisible vices and invisible virtues, right? The virtues of love, we've got care, we've got hate, jealousy, rage, lust, desire, etc. Right? Unhealthy desires, healthy desires, lust. I said lust already. But they operate in patterns and cycles that directly influence us in our tangible world of matter. So an example would be when Cupid strikes you, right? With his arrow of love, you're going to do things under the influence of this love. You might do crazy things, right? You might stay up all night talking to a woman or a man that you love when you need to work at 5 in the morning the next day. You might put yourself in harm's way for them. You might be willing to lay down your life even for them. The things that we do in the name of love, right? In the name of love, in the essence and the identity of love, sometimes they're crazy, right? This isn't speaking of this perfect agapic love necessarily. This is, again, more like eros, more like a sensual love, something closer to what we think of when we think of the emotion of love, although that's not a perfect representation of eros by any stretch of the imagination. But anyways, being able to detect, recognize, and observe these patterns and symbolic motifs in stories and reality helps us in so many ways. I can't stress that enough. They're amazing. And by the way, someone to check out, someone who really has these symbols down, these patterns down really well, are the brothers, the Pageau brothers. Jonathan Pageau and Mathieu Pageau. They're very, very well versed in these things. So check their pattern. Check their channel out. Actually, Jonathan's channel, and Mathieu, he'll show up. I think from time to time on that channel and elsewhere. But you can find him as well. He's living in a yurt right now. He's that crazy about symbols and patterns. Like he's living in a yurt because he believes that we've lost the ability, a lot of our ability to intuitively understand the symbolic world because of our disconnect from nature. We're not living in teepees and yurts and whatnot in nature, so we're not as close, and therefore we have this disconnect. And I think he's right. And I love that he's willing to do that. But anyways, these patterns, these are the benefits. They can tune us, for better or worse, to specific archetypes, you could say. And to be able to recognize that and see that, you'll be able to either embrace that tuning or avoid that tuning, right? If you see these archetypes tuning you to something that you don't want, you can see that, recognize it, and cut it off. They help you understand, in that vein, they help you understand the logos better and how you interact with and are tuned by the logos, right? Which is, yeah, it's the highest thing you can aim at. With patterns, you can predict the future, essentially, right? I'm not talking about divination. I'm not talking about some woo nonsense. I'm talking about being able to recognize how these patterns have worked cyclically in the past. And if you understand that, you're able to see them in the present and understand where we're headed, essentially, right? As society, or even at the level of the individual. You can use these in all sorts of ways, right? You can literally predict the future and, again, understand the past better. You gain insight into people's psychology, and you can understand their behavior better. And in the same way that Jungian psychology helps you see those patterns and the archetypal motifs in people's lives in your own life, these patterns are very, very similar. There's a lot of overlap between Jungian psychology and the patterns and symbolic world that the Pageau brothers talk of, and Jordan Peterson as well, in slightly different ways. You know and understand yourself better. You see your missing of the mark more clearly. You're able to aim better when you're able to see these patterns in your life and cut away the excess, so to speak, and re-aim and rebalance and find that point of equilibrium, that joining of heaven and earth better. Um, you understand better which information to starve yourself of and which information to consume more of. You learn the way reality is structured and how things work in life at the level of the individual, and it scales up all the way up through the cosmos, right? It's the same patterns that are at play in your unconscious mind, those same archetypal forces are at play in the unit of the family, and that scales up from the family to your your group of friends, your community, up to your town or your city, to your state, to your country, to the world, to the cosmos. And this was an interesting one. You realize better how terrifying improper sacrifice can be when you understand the pattern of sacrifice in particular, in the form of work, let's say, for example, and why you want to do your best in the realm of work and sacrifice, but also shows you how exciting the results of proper sacrifice can be. Right. So when you understand that pattern well, you kind of realize that every drop of work, every unit of work that you're able to fulfill contributes to your fate, ultimately, your destiny, excuse me. They can cause you to work harder and better, more efficiently, and aim higher as a result. One of the things I loved about learning to understand these symbols and patterns better is that they help me respect ancient scriptures and teachings much more. Um, and they've helped me see the truth in various different belief systems as well. Not to say that all paths lead to the logos or anything like that precisely, but yeah, there's a lot of truth in a lot of different traditions, and sometimes that goes without being said when it probably should be. For the spiritual, they help sanctify you. Let's say they help pull you up the path of theosis, right? The ultimate form of individuation, you could call it. They work again like tuning forks, and patterns help us distinguish between materialistic views and matters of value and morality. They give you the ability to determine which stage of existence that you're in, you or your family, your society, your nation, the world, and they help connect you, I believe, with those things that are beyond matter. So anyways, there's all sorts of things. They turn you into a true metaphysical magician, quote unquote, of sorts, able to recognize, defend from, and draw order out of chaos. Today, we may call the metaphysical forces active in the world archetypes in the collective unconscious. And a Christian might call them something like angels and demons and saints, or virtues and vices. They're different things, but you get what I'm saying here. So let's go ahead and delve into the pattern of crossing the river. This is an incredibly important motif. It's amazing. So the river is representative of both life and death, as it brings life to the human body when you drink it, and it brings life to the crops of the land. But it can also be a very dangerous place, with the threat of losing your footing as you wade into the rushing river. You can lose your footing in that chaotic current and be pulled off your course to the other side, and potentially even drown, excuse me. And rivers often marked borders of territories in pre-modern times. Rivers were also used to wash, of course, to bathe, to wash away the filth, to wash away the excess. The archetypal pattern of crossing the river is present in many stories, and it represents a transition from one realm or state of being into another, oftentimes a crossing from earth into heaven. The basic motif is the person or group crosses the river, oftentimes from the wilderness or the strange land, from some form of chaos, and they need the river and what's on the other side, essentially. And sometimes they cross the river over a bridge like Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that connects the realm of Midgard, which is the world of humans, with Asgard, the realm of the gods. By the way, that rainbow is just the perfect symbol here, because the rainbow essentially is multiplicity, right? It's every color in the spectrum. Sometimes they wade through the water like Saint Christopher, carrying people across the water and ultimately carrying across the Christ child, accidentally being sanctified in the process. Sometimes they part the waters to cross, like Moses in the Bible, Elijah in the Bible, and Joshua in the Bible. And on the other side is ascension, heaven, the realm of the gods. On the other side of the Ganges, however you say that, I forget, is spiritual enlightenment and liberation from the cycle of death and rebirth, which is samsara. Elijah, Moses, Joshua, and the Israelites cross over the Jordan River into the promised land. Not Moses, Joshua and Caleb. Elijah crosses over the river, the Jordan River, I believe, and then is taken up into heaven by the fiery chariots. But Joshua and the Israelites, they cross over the Jordan River into the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey, which is a physical but also symbolic land representing heaven. The river carries with it symbolically the symbolism of the flood and of baptism, and the flooding of the pneuma, the spirit, after the death and resurrection, descent into hell, and the ascent into heaven of the Christ. To wade into the river and ultimately transcend or walk over the river is to descend into death and chaos, like Christ descending into the underworld, the harrowing of hell we're talking about here, or Jonah descending into the depths of the sea and into the belly of the great fish, or the sea monster, you could even say. We have a lot of examples, actually. Way too many examples. Excuse me, but we've covered Elijah. We have the crossing of the Red Sea out of Egypt, and then the crossing of the river, then to ascend, quote unquote, into the promised land, which is heaven. We did cover that, but essentially, this is how you change worlds, right? The spirit of the first world must go up, leaving behind the new potential for a new or different spirit, quote unquote, to come back down to bring about the next world. I know that's a little bit convoluted, but hopefully you get the point. Jeremiah is put down into a cistern and brought up out of it by a stranger, right? The Ethiopian, the Ethiopian pulls him out with a rotten garment like skin. Joseph is put down into a cistern and pulled up and out by the stranger to go into Egypt, sold to a eunuch. Cherubim are also often seen as guardians of sacred spaces. In the Bible, they guard the way to the tree of life in the Garden of Eden and are depicted on the edge, the margin, outside of the Ark of the Covenant. It carries a similar meaning to the river when it is used as the edge, the boundary, or even the bridge between two realms, between heaven and earth. That is the hybrid. Right, so we're going to go ahead and get into this now. Throughout the Bible and mythology and stories, ancient and modern, at the edge, at the margin, the boundary between heaven and earth, you could say, is the hybrid monster, the cherubim, which is a hybrid, right? The cherubim was described as having the head of an eagle, the head of a human, and of an ox, I believe, or bull, and a lion. These cherubim guarded the Garden of Eden and the sacred space in the form of the Ark of the Covenant, or the Holy of Holies in the temple. The hybrid sphinx was placed at the entrance of temples to guard their mysteries, their sacred knowledge, and is seen as, again, the guardian of secret knowledge in alchemy and other esoteric traditions. The dragon, a hybrid creature, which is essentially all of the most dangerous predators, a mixture. They were the guardians of water before. Later, they were also associated more so with gold and treasure in the West. Not necessarily more so, but with gold and treasure. They were the guardians of rivers and especially the ocean in Chinese mythology. I think Aoguang was one of the dragons, one of the, I think, 4 dragons that guarded the different oceans or the different seas. In Norse and other Germanic mythology, you have Fafnir and Jormungandr. Jormungandr being the very much like the Leviathan, the guardian of the ocean, or it belongs to the ocean of chaos, and it actually is said to sleep at the bottom of the ocean and encompass the entirety of the globe. And I think it even holds its tail in its mouth. I think either that or, it just encompasses the globe, making it the Ouroboros, essentially. In Indian mythology, we have the Naga. In Mesopotamian mythology, we have Tiamat, which is very similar to the Jormungandr and the Leviathan of the scriptures. These sea monsters and dragons, you'll see them in medieval art and in maps. They're always placed far from civilization, at the margin, at the edge of this reality, this mapped reality, in the same way that gargoyles sit at the edge of the church, outside on the walls, the same way that hybrid creatures of ancient times, the winged bull with a human head, for example, of the Assyrians and much of Mesopotamia, actually, it is seated or stands outside of the temple at the entrance of the temple as the guardians. And the winged watchers, by the way, who mated with human women and created this hybrid race called the Nephilim in the Bible and the book of Enoch. And these Nephilim were monstrous hybrids. They were giants. They're situated at the very end of an era, of an age. And they show up right before this great transition between pre-flood world and the post-flood world, essentially, right, to the purified post-flood world. So this is a simple but foundational pattern of reality. Whether you're exploring the depths of your unconscious or traveling into the wilderness or the forest, the farther away from the ordered known, from the center of civilization that you get, the more chaos, the more mixture and multiplicity, and thus danger there is. And that is represented by the hybrid creatures like the dragon, and also the griffin and the cherubim, right? The griffin that flew to heaven with Alexander the Great on their back. The cherubim that guard the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy of Holies, so on and so forth. We've talked about that a little bit already. So anyways, yeah, these hybrids, right? The Sphinx, that's another good one. They are guardians of either sacred knowledge or something like heaven, a heavenly sort of place, or basically they're guardians of the good, of all sorts of good and treasure, gold, sometimes water, which is symbolic of a number of things, depending on the context. That's where the treasure is. That's one of the most important things that I can get across in this video. On the other side of the waters guarded by the dragon, or the depths of the ocean, or the cave or abyss, is some form of paradise, some great reward that you get for defeating or winning over the dragon, or the Sphinx, or the cherubim, right? The Sphinx, you have to answer her riddles, right? And if you answer them correctly, like Oedipus, the Sphinx kills itself, I think, or dies or something, and then gives you access, essentially. That may be as simple, the reward may be as simple as material gold, or as divine and complex as the Spirit of God and heaven. But the pattern is the same. Okay. So anyways, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an understanding of what I'm talking about when I talk about archetypal patterns, the symbolic world, as the Pageau brothers would put it, so that you have a little bit better of a grasp of what I'm talking about if you haven't delved deep into these things before we get to these patterns of the pattern of work, the pattern of sacrifice, the pattern of sowing and reaping, the pattern of the pattern of the flood, of baptism, of the descent into chaos and death that comes before the ascent into heaven, which is very similar to the crossing of the river, of course. which has to do with purity, like purifying. The flowing river purifies the filth, purifies the chaos from your body, right? If you think of like dirt and germs and viruses, all that stuff that's on your skin that accumulates on your skin before you bathe, those things are basically chaos, right? Actively um, trying to get into your ordered space, into your body, and cause some form of death, right? Sickness, disease, etc. And if enough of it accumulates and you leave it there for long enough, it will cause you to get sick. It will bring death and chaos into your body. And so what you have to do is, well, you have to wade into the water and bathe. And that is essentially the river. It's such a fascinating symbol because it's both life and death, right? It's both order and chaos because, well, it's causing some form of order through chaos. It's like fighting fire with fire. It's fighting death with death, because the chaos of these flowing waters is carrying away the chaos that's on your skin, the dirt and the germs and the excess. And that results in life, in ordered purity, right? You've been purified by this river. And that's part of that symbol of crossing the river. I think that's very important, right? The purification side of things, as well as the understanding that it is a border. Oftentimes in pre-modern times, the river was the boundary between two territories. So crossing the river was to cross from one territory into another. So yeah, and another good thing to point out is that it doesn't always lead to an ascension or heaven, right? Sometimes crossing the river means that you're crossing into the underworld, like crossing the Styx in Greek mythology. So, anyways, enough of that for now. Let's go ahead and get into the rest of the video. So, again, psychologically, or not even psychologically necessarily, just in life in general, why are these patterns so important, or how do we use these patterns? Let's delve into the practical application of this a little bit more. So in life, we all have to find our rivers, our boundaries, right? And figure out how to cross over into the promised land, so to speak, right? We see this pattern of transition and change all the time in the physical realm, so to speak, in the seasons, right? Winter transitions into spring, and spring into summer, so on and so forth. We have the months of the year. January becomes February, February becomes March, so on and so forth. When we travel, we transition from one state into the next, or one country to another. We cross these boundaries. But in life, how does it work in life? So when we think of the metaphysical, right, these abstract higher concepts, in my life, I'm constantly asking myself, how do I conceptualize the next level, right? Let's say the next level of my business, or my work, the next level of my relationship, the next level of my marriage. How do I get to the next level of fatherhood? How do I become a better father? First off, how do I conceptualize that? How do I define that? How do I see its structure, its boundaries? What questions do I have to ask myself to define that next level? And then, how do I cross that river, so to speak? How do I cross the boundary between my current season, or my current level, and the next, the higher? And of course, there's an ultimate version of all of this that we all detect in some way, shape, or form. We see the pattern, but far from fully, right? The ultimate version of crossing the water and ascending into heaven is transcending the waters of death, purification, chaos, and hell, you could call it, to ascend into heaven, to divine order, that divine order that fills all things, even death and chaos, nature as well. But what does that mean? I think that's something we all struggle with, right? It's kind of, who knows, it might be what Jordan Peterson is struggling with in his book. What is it called? He Who Wrestles with God, something like that. Ultimately, the answer is we don't really know completely. We don't understand these higher things. We can barely make them out, let alone describe them. And, like we can observe things in nature and in the material world, but there's something there. And I'm doing my best to find those patterns and observe them and be able to recognize them and use them to my advantage, which, by the way, I believe is ultimately the ultimate purpose of these patterns is to point you to the logos, is to help you aim and maintain that aim at the logos and embody the logos. Right, and that demands the fool, the archetype of the fool's mind, the beginner's mind, and that's what precedes the flood and baptism and washes away the excess and purifies, leading to transcendence, ascension. But that fool archetype is important, right? That has a very similar symbolism to the cherubim and the griffin, the hybrids, right? The fool is the one that is both in the king's court, in the presence of the king, but is also outside simultaneously, is also the voice of the people. The fool, the jester, is the one that straddles that line between order and chaos, and we need a little bit of that for sure in our psyches. That's what we need before anything, because the fool precedes the master. The fool precedes the savior. So yeah, just a little bit of food for thought before we get into the rest of this.